This video is best viewed on a full screen at 1080p quality. Click the gear at the lower right corner of the video window. Next, click the quality option. And finally, select 1080p. I'm projecting all of the images in a dimly lit room rather than a dark room. For this, I'm using two shaded lamps placed about 12 feet diagonally from the center of the screen, and each lamp has a small 15-watt chandelier bulb in it. The ambient light in the room measures 4 lumen at the center of the screen. So the two most important factors in your home theater are obviously the projector and the screen, and that's why I want to quickly mention the type of screen I'm projecting onto. In this case, it's a Spandex projector screen instead of the more typical blackout material. There are several advantages to this type of screen, one of which it can attach to a $30 backdrop stand. It's easy to do. You just take some 5 spring clips and you attach the screen to the backdrop stand. And this can be used outdoors in your backyard, or take it with you camping or to a party. And the screen I have here is made in the USA by Stretch Screen USA. It's available on Amazon for around $80, which is actually less than a do-it-yourself fixed frame type screen. You don't have to buy wood, corner brackets, staples, and actually build the frame as you do with that type of frame. The other advantage is that you don't need a permanent empty wall space. For example, the situation I have here is a little awkward to put up a fixed frame screen because I have a staircase in the way. But with the Spandex projector screen, that's not a problem. It literally only takes 30 seconds to put up this screen. Right here, we're all halfway done already. It just simply attaches to 5 small hooks that are in the ceiling, and you can barely see them. And the corner brackets, the bottom corners, attach with a bungee to something as simple as a water jug or whatever you want to use for that. And there you have it. The screen is completely up. So here you can see the Spandex projector screen produces a really good image, but that's only half the story. Check this out. If we pick up our camera and walk around behind the screen, you can see that the Spandex projector screen can also act as a backlight screen. That's like getting 2 screens in one. No other type of projector screen can do this. Now, buyer beware, you may be tempted to go with a cheaper knockoff version from China, but go with the one made in the USA. It's Amazon's choice, even at a higher price, and it has 147 reviews so far, where the cheap one only has 3 reviews, which can easily be faked. So here's the Amazon product page of the Spandex projector screen that I have, and they have images along the left. As you can see, it's a much cleaner design instead of sewn crooked and all that. And the fabric is a much higher quality. It's a tighter weave, which will give you better colors and a sharper image. And here is a real-world example of that. I have the 2 screens hung side by side, with the Made in the USA one on the left and the Chinese knockoff version on the right. And you can really see the difference in the color quality, the brightness, the saturation. And if you look at this next image here, you can actually see how much detail you lose in the smoke due to the looser weave of the cheaper fabric. Here's the product page one more time, and I put a link in the description to make it easy for you. Alright, let's get going. Compare our projectors. Here you can see the size comparison between the RIF6 Cube Pico projector with a brightness of 50 lumen and an 854 by 480 resolution, and the Aaxa P2-A Pico projector with a brightness of 130 lumen and a similar 854 by 480 resolution. Our first comparison is a simple white image to compare the brightness of each projector. As you can see, the RIF6 Cube is slightly brighter than the Aaxa P2-A. Next, we'll zoom in to compare the pixels. Here are some basic colored squares, and there are similar colors from both projectors. And you might want to pause on this next image. This is the actual lumen measurement of each color. This was done in a completely dark room as opposed to a dimly lit room like all the other slides were shot in. And we'll zoom in to compare the color pixels. And here we have a basic color gradient, and we have a similar color profile from both projectors. Next, we'll look at a little bit more advanced color gradient. And very similar color profiles once again. Similar brightness as well. And here's some colored smoke on a white background. The Aaxa P2-A has some over sharpening artifacts, giving some jagged edges. And let's zoom in to compare that more closely. Next we have the colored smoke on a black background, and the RIF6 Cube has brighter highlight details. And we'll zoom in on this one to compare that more closely. Here we have some bars for shadows and highlights. The Aaxa P2-A has better highlights. And let's zoom in on this one to compare the details. This one we'll look at the shadows of this image. Fairly similar shadow details. The RIF6 Cube might be a little bit brighter in the highlights. And zooming in, we can compare that here. Here we'll look at the highlights of this image. The Aaxa P2-A has better contrast than the RIF6 Cube. And here's a good shadowy image, and very similar shadow details between the two projectors. And we'll zoom in to compare that more closely. Here we'll look at the shadows and highlights in a single image. The Aaxa P2-A has better highlight details than the RIF6 Cube. Next we'll compare the resolution with some grids. Both projectors struggle with accurately reproducing the grid pattern. The lines aren't even, and we zoom in, we can see that more closely here. Here's a similar grid pattern for comparison. And the RIF6 Cube enlarges and crops the edges of the image. And let's zoom in to compare the details here. Here we have some black grids on a white background, and we get fairly similar results from both projectors. And we can zoom in to compare that more closely. Next we'll reverse that and look at some white grids on a black background, and the RIF6 Cube does a slightly better job reproducing the grids. And zooming in, we can see that here. Not a big difference though. Here we'll compare the text quality. Very similar text quality from both projectors. And we'll take a look at that more closely here. RIF6 Cube may be a little better. Here we'll look at skin tones, and the Aaxa P2-A faces are more natural. The RIF6 Cube faces are a little bit too yellow. And zooming in, we can compare that here. A few more faces for comparison. And the RIF6 Cube faces look a little washed out in comparison to the Aaxa P2-A here. And zooming in. Okay, a simple color comparison. Fairly similar image quality and color quality from both projectors. And we'll zoom in on this one to compare that. Here's a similar image for comparison, and fairly similar color and contrast. You really can't tell much of a difference between the two. And here's a lower contrast image with some fog. The Aaxa P2-A has much more saturated colors. And here's a good one for color comparison. The Aaxa P2-A has some over sharpening artifacts, giving us some jagged edges there. And let's look at the shadow details in the sky. Fairly similar image quality from both projectors. The Aaxa P2-A might have a little bit better colors when we zoom in here. Not too much of a difference. Here's a high contrast image. Once again, fairly similar image quality from both projectors. And zooming in, we can compare that here. Here we'll look at the contrast with this image. Not a drastic difference, fairly similar image quality once again. And we'll zoom in on this one to compare the details. Here's a good dimly lit scene. Fairly similar image quality and no drastic difference. We'll zoom in on the pyramid here and compare the sharpness. Here's a sunset, and the Aaxa P2-A has more orange in the sunset. Personal preference as to which one you prefer. Here's a bridge lit up at night, fairly similar image quality. The Aaxa P2-A once again has a little bit more color saturation. And let's zoom in and we can see the details might be slightly better from the Aaxa. Here's a good night shot. Fairly similar image quality once again. Almost looks like the same projector in some of these. So let's zoom in and compare the backgrounds. Here's a green train. Fairly similar image quality. And we'll zoom in to compare the details on this one. Here's an illuminated balloon. Very similar image quality again. Our next image, we'll look at some fine line detail with some fireworks. Similar results from both projectors. And our final image is a night shot with some stars in the sky. Again, no drastic differences, very similar image quality. And let's zoom in on this one to finish up. Next, we'll compare the RIF6 Cube to a quote-unquote full-size name brand BenQ projector that's rated at 2000 lumen. You'll learn in some of my other reviews that the name brand 2000 lumen projectors are actually many times brighter than the so-called 2000 lumen budget projectors that sell on Amazon for under $150. Here's a quick brightness comparison between the sub $100 dB Power T20 budget projector with a claimed rating of 1800 lumen and the name brand BenQ projector rated at 2000 lumen. From this picture, it's clear that the claims of cheap knockoffs are not always true. I think you'd agree the BenQ projector on the right is much more than 10% brighter than the budget projector on the left. The same holds true for the quality of your projector screen. Here's a quick comparison between a cheap $30 Spandex projector screen made in China on the right and an $80 Spandex projector screen made in the USA on the left. As you can see, it's worth spending a bit more for the higher quality image you'll get. With that being said, you will remember from the beginning of this video I showed you that I was projecting these images onto a white Spandex projector screen. However, if you want to use your projector in a room that's not totally dark, or if you want to use it outside, like in your backyard for an outdoor movie, or take it camping or to a party or something, there are two things you may want to consider: a brighter projector and the darker silver Spandex projector screen. Even though the silver screen looks quite a bit darker than the white screen, it'll actually give you a nice bright image with more contrast, which is especially useful when you can't get an environment that's completely dark, such as being outside with a full moon or if there's streetlights nearby. Now, the other benefit of the darker silver Spandex screen is that you won't have to wash it as often if you accidentally drop it on the ground, because you won't notice dirt as much on the darker fabric. But keep in mind, if the Spandex screen does get dirty, you can just throw it in the washer using cool water and then dry it for 10 to 15 minutes in the dryer and it's good as new. That's not as easy with some other types of projector screens. And finally, you'll remember when I showed you the rear projection ability of the white Spandex projector screen. Well, the silver screen has that same ability. Okay, let's continue with our BenQ comparison. Here you can see the size comparison between the tiny RIF6 Cube Pico projector with a brightness of 50 lumen and an 854 by 480 resolution, and the full-size name brand BenQ W1070 projector with a brightness of 2000 lumen and a higher 1920 by 1080 resolution. Our first comparison is a simple white image to compare the brightness. As you can see, the BenQ is much brighter than the RIF6 Cube. Now let's zoom in to compare the pixels. And here are the basic colored squares. The BenQ is much brighter, but both have good colors. Here is the lumen measurement of each color. This was done in a completely dark room as opposed to a dimly lit room like most of our other slides were shot in. And let's zoom in to compare the color pixels. Here's a basic color gradient, the BenQ, much brighter. And a more advanced color gradient, nice colors from both, with the BenQ being brighter. Here you can see the BenQ image is much brighter and sharper, and we'll zoom in to compare the details. Here's the smoke on a black background, and once again the BenQ is sharper and crisper. Zooming in, we can see that here. Here are the shadow and highlight bars, and we can zoom in to compare the details. Here the highlights and shadows are much better from the BenQ. Here the highlights are much better on the BenQ. And once again, the shadows are much brighter from the BenQ, and zooming in you can see that. Here we can see both the highlights and the shadows are better from the BenQ projector. And here we can see the grid pattern is reproduced much better from the BenQ, and zooming in we can compare that more closely. Here's a similar grid pattern, and we'll zoom in on this one to compare the details. Here's a black grid on a white background, much sharper and crisper from the BenQ projector. Here's the opposite with a white grid on a black background, and zooming in on this one we can see the sharpness of the BenQ. Here is a good text example, and we can zoom in and see the text is much sharper and clearer from the higher resolution BenQ projector. And here we see good skin tones from both projectors. The BenQ are brighter, and zooming in we can see how much sharper it is as well. Here's some more faces to compare, and we'll zoom in and see how much better the faces look on the BenQ projector. Here is a good color comparison. Color's brighter and sharper from the BenQ projector. Here's a similar image for comparison, and once again brighter, sharper image from the BenQ. The higher resolution BenQ is brighter as well, and the colors are better from the BenQ with a brighter background. Once again, the sky is brighter from the BenQ projector, and zooming in we can see the details are much crisper. Here's a good high contrast image, and zooming in we can see the comparison here. Here you can see the contrast is much better from the BenQ projector, and zooming in the details are crisper. Here's a good low light image with the BenQ being much brighter. Zooming in the details are crisper as well. And the sunset scene, the BenQ once again much brighter. And the nighttime bridge scene much brighter from the BenQ. Zooming in the details are much crisper from the higher resolution. And once again nighttime scene much brighter from the BenQ. Zooming in the fence details are much better. And here the brighter BenQ gives us much better shadow details, and zooming in the higher resolution gives us a much crisper image. Here the balloon is brighter and sharper, and we get better fine line details from the BenQ. And our final image, a night scene, the BenQ is much brighter and sharper, and zooming in you can compare that. So my final advice is as follows. If you're always going to be using your projector in a totally dark room, then the brightness isn't as important as the resolution. It'd be better to get a dimmer projector with a higher resolution. So if your viewing environment isn't totally dark, such as a room with windows and you don't have blackout curtains during the day, or you're outside where there may be street lights or a glowing moon, then you'll want to go with a brighter projector. But remember that cheap projectors are almost never as bright as they claim to be. And as far as resolution goes, I would typically pick a less bright projector with a higher resolution over a brighter projector with a lower resolution. You can always try to make your room darker, but you'll never be able to increase the resolution of your projector. I personally would never get a projector with a resolution below 720p, which is a resolution of 1280 pixels across by 720 pixels high. The reason for this is that you'll most likely be enlarging the video to about 9 feet across, and at that size you can actually see the individual pixels on lower resolution projectors. I think a 1080p projector is about the highest resolution you'd need, as a 4K projector doesn't really add all that much to the picture quality for the much higher price you'd be paying. Here's a screenshot from a YouTube video that compares a 4K projector versus a 180p projector. It's being projected onto a wall, but even so, there's really not much difference between the quality. As far as sound goes, I would recommend an external speaker of some sort, as most projectors that I've come across under $500 do not have great sound quality. But I will say I was fairly impressed with the sound I got from the soda can-sized Nebula capsule. You'll also want to consider if you'd like a portable projector that can run on batteries, as opposed to a projector that has to be plugged into the wall. The portability of the smaller projectors is always nice, but keep in mind that the battery life is almost always under 2 hours. But it is not limited to running on the battery only. You can always plug it in for unlimited runtime. As far as portable projectors go, I really like the Aaxa brand. The P300, P700, and M5 projectors have a fairly high resolution, nice colors, and good brightness. The Nebula capsule also produces a decent image with a really good speaker, but it does have a lower resolution than the 3 Aaxa projectors. Alright everybody, thanks for your time. I hope you found this video informative, and if you think others would find it helpful, please click the thumbs up button, which makes it easier for them to find it. And also don't forget to click on the links for the Spandex projector screens below in the description, and check back for more projector comparison videos coming up soon. Thanks for watching.